The Fortnite Champion Series began in August of 2019, where Fortnite was in Chapter 1 Season X. This initial interpretation really set the standard going forward, as many of the decisions made back then are still used to this day. But for some reason, Epic Games decided to make this trios. Now, this was an odd since at the time there'd only ever been 2 one-day trios cash cups ever, and you couldn't even play trio pubs as the playlist didn't exist yet. Presumably this was chosen because the previous season was the Fortnite World Cup, which was the best solos and duos in the world, and they'd already been decided, so maybe Epic Games just wanted to switch it up a bit and find out who the best trio was. In 2019, Epic Games pledged to give away $100 million in competitive prizing total, which they didn't, but that's a totally different topic, so they were just throwing money at tournaments. Across the 6 weeks, Epic Games gave away a total of $10 million split across the 5 regions. You'd think that the large amount of this would be in the finals, however $6 million of it actually happened in the qualifiers, with $1 million in the semifinals and the remaining $3 million in the finals. Of course, these prize pools were in no way sustainable, but that didn't stop players from absolutely bagging out. In the 5 weekly qualifiers, fan favorites Mongraal, Mitro and Benji Fishy placed second, first, and first, earning a combined $134,400. They were landing at Retail Row, which had horde spawners that gave them multiple launchpads and gold loot every single game. However, come finals, they weren't the only ones interested in gaining this advantage. Hiriachi, Fremok and Kong would start to push them every single game using the mechs, throwing any chance that MMB had at winning the finals. On top of the lobby, both literally and in terms of leaderboard placement, was Aqua, Stompy and Shinken. At the time, Stompy and Shinken had the most impressive run in Fortnite history during the World Cup qualifiers, and Aqua was the World Cup champion. It would be easy to claim that this trio was the best in the world, and I did, but given MMB had dominated the qualifiers and had a massive social presence, then was, air quotes, griefed in the finals, the success of Aqua, Stompy and Shinken wasn't discussed anywhere near as much as it should have been. With Chapter 2 starting the following season, the community was happy to see the announcement that FNCS was going to return. Up until this point, Fortnite had never really had a consistent competitive circuit every season, so this was a massive step in the right direction. Strangely, Epic Games decided to switch away from trios format and move to squads. Now, this did mean that in 2019 there was a major championship for every game mode: Solo World Cup, Duo World Cup, Trios in Season X, and now Squads in Chapter 2 Season 1. But this was really the first high-level Squads tournament that Fortnite officially hosted in-game. But there was one major lesson learned from this FNCS. God, Squads is just so boring. Oh my lordy. Fighting in stacked lobbies was incredibly uninteresting to watch, since nearly all of the fights are just 4 players just spraying at another team. And since only 1 player on each team really needed to tarp the team and tunnel them in, that meant everyone else was just carrying a bunch of materials. So if you had a good early and mid game, your end game was pretty much just set up for you and you could just build to a top 3 finish. Squads is like a really fun game mode for one-off build tournaments, but for the highest level it really just doesn't function well, and I think Chapter 2 Season 1 FNCS was really big proof of that. It was great that Epic Games were continuing to have a competitive circuit every single season, however there were a lot of very valid reasons that the community were starting to get a bit more concerned. With consistent tournaments, players were getting better fast. This meant that the loot pool started to become quite problematic, in particular grenades. At the time, grenades dealt 100 damage, and after a certain amount of time in the sky, they would auto-explode. This meant that entire squads could line up perfect throws at enemies who were boxed up and guarantee free elims. Another reason they were concerned is that Epic Games were just stopped doing the broadcast. Now, these broadcasts were and are incredibly expensive. However, combine that with the prize pool reducing from 10 million in Season X to now 4 million in Chapter 2 Season 1, and the community got the impression that Epic Games were distancing themselves from competitive Fortnite altogether. In fact, the next season, in Chapter 2 Season 2, the community had to band together to host their own broadcast. BullTW and ShowerWager, along with, I think Oceantics was there at times, I can't actually remember, casted their own broadcast produced by the practice server. Now, the show itself was very well received. However, the fact that Epic Games hadn't hosted one for 2 seasons in a row was very concerning. And in this season, for some reason, the game mode was switched back to duos. Now, if you haven't figured out, I've just totally given up trying to figure out any logic in why Epic Games chose the game modes that they did, and it gets worse as the seasons move on. At the beginning of the season, there was an FNCS warm-up held, and this was actually the first tournament that the Fortnite GOAT Tayson ever won. And looking at his placements, you could easily see this was the catalyst for his Chapter 2 dominance. Unsurprisingly, the pro players weren't very happy this season. The reduction in prize pools continued, sort of. The total prize pool for FNCS was actually raised from $4 million to $5 million. However, 2 two FNCS were run at the same time. One half of the prize pool went to console and mobile, and the other half went to PC. Now, since you could only play one, that meant the total prize pool for the best players in the world had reduced from 4 million down to 2.5 million, and this was now the third season in a row where they were making less money than ever. For the casual players, this was great as they were able to earn in the console cups. However, splitting 50% of the prize pool to console really didn't make much sense given the skill disparity between the two platforms. From the competitive community's perspective, the game was taking a dark turn. Prize pools were reducing each season, Epic Games were caring more about their casual player base than their competitive audience, broadcasts had been cancelled, but Epic Games came with a shining hope of light, something to raise the mood like no other. A solo FNCS. Now, if you didn't know, a lot of the best players in the world don't really like solos as a competitive game mode. And since Chapter 2 Season 2 was extended by around 2 months, Epic Games decided to host the first FNCS Invitational. Now, this wasn't an in-person LAN like would be held in 2022, however, it was an event for the best FNCS players of the season to battle it out as solos. Here, Benji Fishy dominated the competition, winning 4 of the 6 rounds of qualifiers. Unfortunately, he totally flopped in the finals, being unable to make it into the top half of the leaderboard, but he had already made $65,000 from the 2 weeks of qualifiers, so I don't think that was a bad few days in the office. For some reason, Epic Games were convinced to bring back the broadcast, which the reasons of were never made public, and thankfully we got Bola in the tub. But do you know what lightens the mood even more than one solo FNCS? Yes, that is right, 2 solo FNCS back to back. Now, I personally love solos, but apparently a lot of other people don't. Chapter 2 Season 3 was the first season that the GOAT Tayson would win his first FNCS title, dominating the lobby in Game 5 of the 12 Elam win. Still to this date, the side jump one pump that he did using the charged shotgun to retake height was one of the nicest plays, in my opinion, in FNCS history, and certainly something that's close to impossible to do now with the current day server lag. It's Chapter 2 Season 4. We're back to trios. Why? I don't know, but we are. More importantly, it's my first season on the broadcast, and I dressed as Shia Wager. Epic Games just restarted doing the broadcast for the PC path, but had done close to almost zero promotion for the console track. So despite console presumably making up more than half of players, participation in the FNCS was way lower than on PC, and Season 4 would actually be the last to host a console FNCS. But Chapter 2 Season 4 was the start of a trend that would later come to haunt the FNCS, the wildcard round. Since there were 4 heats in the semifinals, with the top 8 qualifying to the finals, this meant that only 32 teams would qualify. Now, the last time a trio FNCS was held, which was Chapter 1 Season X, only 32 teams played. However, in a 100-player lobby, you can actually fit 33 teams, so enter the wildcard round. The best teams from the semifinals that hadn't already qualified to the finals played in one single match. Whoever picked up the Victory Royale qualified and took that 33rd slot. As entertaining as it was to see Tayson, Mongraal, and Mitro win the grand finals, this single wildcard round was arguably more interesting and tense to watch than the entire 12 games of finals. Whoever won that match would earn a spot in the finals, and whoever came second would cry and be mocked on Twitter forever. It was like just pure content.
I mean, yeah, no, listen, Reese, of course it's hype. The hype is real.
With the year 2020 ending, everyone was anticipating what Epic Games was going to do with 2021. Since the world was leaving lockdowns, the Fortnite community was patiently awaiting a World Cup 2 announcement for 2021. We didn't get it, but for the first time, we did get a yearly blog detailing Epic Games' plan for the entire year of 2021. This is actually the first time that Fortnite has ever clearly laid out their entire plans for a full year, which was extremely well received by the community. For the first time, Fortnite announced that they were going to stick with one game mode for the entire year, which was trios. Why? I have absolutely no idea, but potentially the odd scramble of different game modes in 2020 was just to test which was better, but I do think choosing a consistent game mode for one entire year was massively needed to create some consistency in strategy and storytelling around the teams. They also had announced that the yearly prize pool has increased from $17 million to $20 million, with each FNCS in seasons 5 to 8 having a $3 million prize pool. However, all of this prizing had been moved to the finals. Now, this meant that no matter how well you performed in the qualifiers or the semis, you'd make $0 if you didn't qualify to the grand finals. Personally, I think this was a great change, as the prize you get for performing well in the qualifiers is, no surprise, to qualify. However, this really frustrated some of the good players who couldn't consistently make it to the finals and only could get to the semifinals. My response to that is just play better. The initial change spawned a massive problem, however. With 3 weekly qualifiers, if players performed well in the first 2, they were pretty much guaranteed a spot in the semifinals without even having to play the third qualifier. This meant that when they played the third qualifier, they were just griefing and messing around, and it created some very, very strange broadcasts to watch. However, one line in this Epic Games announcement piqued everyone's interest. FNCS champions and other consistent top performers will earn the opportunity to be invited to the mid and end of year competitions. At this point, Epic Games had made no statement surrounding LANs, so of course the entire community was hyped that this may be World Cup 2. Spoiler, it wasn't. These events were the FNCS All-Star and the Grand Royale. The All-Star event was a personal favourite of mine, and it's something I'm really disappointed to not see return in future years. Epic Games created different trials to test pro players' individual skills against one another. Blueprint Battle was an edit course, Bullseye Bonanza was an aim training course, High Tier was a race where players had to do specific build movements in order to get to the finish line first, Play for Keeps was a 3v3 zero build mode, which was way before zero build was ever introduced, and to finish off, it was a solo showdown, which is basically another solo FNCS, and to no one's surprise, this was won by Tayson again. This event was hosted long before UEFN was released, so I'm sure if they ran this back again, they could make this 10 times more interesting, and if they do it on LAN and have a solo event afterwards, come on, that's an event that everyone wants to see midway through the year. The big end of year event though was the Grand Royale. This had a $5 million prize pool. Unfortunately though, I feel like this event was pretty forgettable. Since there was a trio FNCS in chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8, hosting an additional one with a bigger prize pool at the end of the year was just a little bit too much. Of course, had this been on LAN with the best players from all regions, it would have been incredible, but since everything was still hosted online, this was just a little bit forgettable and poo. Most importantly, the qualification system was pretty much the worst you could have ever possibly chosen. Now remember that wildcard match I talked about earlier? Well, through the year of 2021, Epic Games would now just milk the idea completely dry, renaming it to the Reboot Round. Now, the second iteration of this in Chapter 2 Season 5 was amazing because it was one game. And the beauty of these is the fact that the teams only had one chance. It was one game and everything was on the line. You win, you qualify to the finals. You don't win, you don't. The storylines of the winners were incredible, but the real gold was in the pain that the second place players felt by not qualifying. It was some real emotions that Fortnite Competitive had massively lacked up until this point. Finally, Fortnite had some good stories to tell. So, with all of that information, you may be able to see why the qualification format for the Grand Royale was awful. Every team had to win a game, so there was 32 reboot rounds across 2 days. This totally killed any hype of the format since there wasn't any devastating loss in placing second, as you had 31 other matches to play after that. Naturally, this was incredibly draining for players and for viewers, and it really made the tournament drag on and was pretty boring. However, one thing that Epic Games did really well this event was the Hype Hour. This was basically an announcement blog to what the Chapter 3 details would be, but in a show, and it was done in a much more fun way than just posting a blog. There was 3 different chests, each with their own announcement. The community all thought the World Cup 2 was finally going to be announced, and us on the broadcast also thought that World Cup 2 was going to be announced. As for context, the people on the show were given absolutely zero information on what these announcements were going to be. But yeah, they didn't announce it, or actually any details of LANs returning soon, but basically at the end of the show they said that they wanted to. They did however announce that 2021 would be duos for the entire year, with absolutely no reasoning why. But they also did announce a new format which included a match point system. Now if you don't know, a match point format is essentially once a certain team hits a point threshold, all they need to do in order to win the tournament is win a game. It's a great system that Apex Legends uses, or used, I'm not entirely sure because I don't follow the scene, and it would essentially give Fortnite a winning moment. Currently the last game can be kind of boring because it's just about whoever has the most points total, so the winning team could die early in the final game and have no massive winning cheering moment. However, if they were forced to win the final game once they hit a certain point threshold, this would give the tournament a really nice end. However, they decided to set the points threshold to 500 points. That point threshold was never hit, and then it was just removed from the rules with absolutely no mention of why, and it's not returned since. So Chapter 3 rolls around, it's duos for the full year, $3 million every single FNCS. Things are good. Unfortunately, Chapter 3 was relatively unsuccessful. Views on content was down, player counts of tournaments slowly dropped over the year, and the overall community sentiment towards Fortnite was low. This wasn't just competitively, it seemed like Fortnite was getting stale to the average player, which was then having a knock-on effect to the competitive player base. But midway through 2022, an announcement was finally made. The FNCS Invitational 2022, an international LAN event held in Raleigh, North Carolina. FNCS has only only ever been hosted online for the last 3.5 years, so the community was delighted to finally have an event to travel to in person. The prize pool was only $1 million, the lowest in FNCS history, but no one even really cared. Everyone was just way too excited about the prospect of finally being able to go back to in-person events that they didn't even care that the prize pool had reduced so much. The Invitational was held in the final season of the chapter, with no online FNCS available for the first time in 12 seasons. It had been years since the community had a glimpse into how good some of the smaller regions were, and they were some ass. As is tradition, no OCE players made it out of the bottom 10. However, Brazil's PZine and Kitos managed a 5th place finish, with the top 10 mostly dominated by EU and NA players. The final game came down to a 2v2 to win the championship between Kami and Seti and Queasy and Vino. Still to this date, the best moment in competitive Fortnite history, of course, outside of the PlayStation Solo Zero Build finals, of course. There were some technical hiccups on the first day of the show, which made it drag on a little bit. However, having an international event where the best players from all regions could go against each other was exactly what the community needed. Once the event was over, it seemed like the entire player base was much more motivated than ever to grind competitive Fortnite. With the release of Fortnite Chapter 4 following soon after, player numbers started to trend back upwards. But in Chapter 4 Season 2, Fortnite would make the first major region change in FNCS history. They combined the NA East and NA West region. Now, for viewership and competitive integrity, this was a great move, as it essentially removed a smaller region and combined it with a major region, giving NA a much higher skill ceiling overall. I know you're maybe going to the comments to talk about ping and NA being bad unless you live in Texas, but for FNCS this was definitely the right move in my personal opinion. This chapter had almost the exact same structure as the year before, however rather than the year ending with an invitational, the first FNCS Global Championship was held. The online FNCSs were renamed to majors, each with qualification slots to the Global Championship at the end of the year. Chapter 3 had a total FNCS prize pool of $10 million, with 90% of that going to the online FNCS and 10% going to the end of year LAN. However, in Chapter 4, Epic committed a larger percentage of this $10 million to the LAN, with $2 million going to each of the 3 majors and $4 million going to the FNCS Global Championship. Many people in the community were still hoping for a World Cup 2, but I think they failed to realize that the word global means world and championship means cup. The arena, production, and quality of this event was truly insane, but there were 2 main areas that were major pain points. Firstly, server performance was truly awful. This was hands down the laggiest FNCS I have ever watched. Usually the spectator system that these events use hides the amount of lag to an extent, but even through that it looked unplayable, and I can only imagine what it looked like on the player screens. The format was also pretty lackluster. This was the 3-day event with 2 days of bracket qualifiers and then 1 day of finals. Since there was only 1 day of finals, this meant that the winners were decided in 6 games rather than the usual 12. In reality, Cooper and Miro had such a large lead by game 5 that it meant game 6 was entirely pointless in deciding the winner, which made for a pretty boring finish. Oh yeah, and a cheater qualified, but I've already covered that in another video. The format was pretty bad and the games were incredibly laggy. However, despite all of that, the event was still really enjoyable and a great watch. The viewership numbers were some of the highest in FNCS history, and as a starting point for yearly LANs, this was a really good point Epic Games can then continually improve on each year. If this is as bad as an FNCS LAN will get, then I think we're at a really good point. But going forward, Epic would make a massive change that was hated by the entire competitive community. In the Chapter 5 announcement blog, they stated that for competitive clarity, Siphon will not be included in the 2024 FNCS majors. Now, the ability to gain 50 shield or health on Elim is a vital part of endgames that allows players to get out of tricky situations when they have low HP and clutch up big time, and its removal was not received positively. To this date, Epic Games have not made a public announcement on why they feel Siphon does not fit competitive, but this change is not a good start for 2024. On top of that, the $10 million yearly prize pool for FNCS was reduced down to $7 million. Now, given 2023 seems to have been the most successful year for Fortnite ever, both casually and competitively, this change seems to make little to no sense. The reduction has hit Brazil and Asia the hardest, with their prize pool being reduced by 40%, and the main chunk of this change has come from the FNCS Global Championship, where the prize pool was reduced from $4 million in 2023 now to $2 million in 2024. 2024. This means that the winners in 2024 will no longer make $1 million like Cooper and Miro did in 2023, which is a real shame as I felt like this was a good selling point for the event. However, the announcements for 2024 were a bit mixed, as there were also some good changes made. A large amount of changes have been made to make FNCS a better viewing experience, which is definitely heavily needed because competitive Fortnite can be a very difficult watch. For each of the 3 majors in the year, the qualifiers have changed from top 50 to top 250 teams, which means that rather than 1 lobby playing, there's going to be 5. This means that viewing parties are going to have more endgames to watch, which is generally the more interesting part for casuals anyway, but I don't necessarily know if this is really a good change. We'll see. Semi-finals have a very confusing format, which I can't even tell you off the top of my head how it works. However, there's an importance of winning a game, as this will just qualify you straight to the grand finals, so there's hype in that. And then once you're in the grand finals, the second day has a 1.5 times multiplier on all points, which means that if a team is far ahead, like Mir and Cooper was at the 2023 Global Championship, then there's still a chance for other teams to catch up because those second day points have more weight to them. Now, this isn't the most competitive change by any means, and I'm sure that a lot of pros will hate it, but this was implemented in the 2021 Grand Royale, and it was a very hyped day 2. It made it very interesting to watch. However, all of these changes won't make the viewing experience any better if lag is not prioritized heavily across the year, as performance should be a #1 focus for Epic Games. But the biggest announcement is that they partnered with Blast, who are the producers who have done FNCS over the last 2 years, and they've signed a 4-year agreement to continue producing the events. And of course, this is really good news because it shows that Epic Games are committed to FNCS for many years to come.